So, welcome to the Zoom family, and we'll start with a prayer from anyone that wants to say a short prayer. So we have blessings, and then we can pick up our story where we left Juliet Thompson and Abdul Baha back in 1912. We got to go back. 1912 beats 1920, 2020.
Can't disagree.
I mean, there was a world war coming, though. It's not that great. I mean, 2 years later, the world just went crazy. So, who is our wonderful volunteer that can say a few lines?
I can say prayer.
Go ahead, Mr.
David.
Same, please. Go ahead. We're all there with you.
Okay. O thou incomparable God, O thou Lord of the kingdom, the souls are thy heavenly army. Assist them with the call of supreme concourse, and make them victorious so that each one of them may become like unto a regiment and conquer this country through the love of God and the illumination of divine teachings. O God, be thou the supporter and the helper, and in the wilderness, the mountain, the valley, the forest, the prairies, and the seas, be thou the confidence, so that they may cry out to the power of the kingdom and the breath of the Holy Spirit. Verily, thou art the powerful, the mighty, the omnipotent, thou art wise, and the hearing and the seeing.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. That wonderful prayer. And Susie, hello to our friends here before we start the meeting. My wife is here. She has to be here.
Hello, Madam
So,
Zein.
hello, everybody.
Good evening.
It's so nice to see you all. So now, I can't keep my glasses because if I keep my glasses, I can see.
Claudia is just joining.
So I can't stay close to the computer. So I'm going to stay further back, and then I won't see you because I have to see the book. So I'm suffering on all grounds.
Loud and clear.
Wow, Sudabe, if you say so, I believe you. All right. And if I speak like this, you still see me and hear me?
Yes.
Yes or no?
Reasonably well.
Yes.
Oh, now you're scaring me now. Okay, I have to.
I can hear you.
You change your adjectives, and I don't know. So if I'm here, is this okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Is Turkey hearing me?
Not as loud, but definitely clear.
So should I get closer and you can see my forehead, or can I stay far away? And I don't want to lose
It's
you
okay
because
by me, but it depends on all the other friends also.
I can turn up my speaker so it's louder.
Yeah, I need to put a cushion in my back because I'm just very uncomfortable. It's all right. I mean, I shouldn't complain about being comfortable, but I need to read.
But you can sit back and we can all turn up our speakers so we can hear you well enough.
Well, I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to do something.
No, why not? That's okay.
Okay. Maybe I should speak louder. No, it's fine. I think it's okay. Now let's see what comments can I make before I start reading. Now, the funny thing about Juliet Thompson is that when I was going the lives, incidents or stories of other people connected to Abdul Baha, I would pick and choose, you know, and her diary. I don't do much skipping. I don't even do much research actually, because it flows so nicely that I feel awful cutting something out of what she says, although I should be editing and choosing, but it will go much faster. But I just don't feel like I want to finish this. I mean, we have to finish it, you know, maybe next week, maybe, or maybe if I'm not here the week after, then it's going to be from France that they will continue the story of Juliet Thompson. But I mean, there's so many Baha'is, and so many have met Abdul Baha. I mean, it's tons of them, you know, I mean, hundreds, maybe thousands when he came to the States. But somehow, Juliet Thompson is just really charming and she's fun. Other ones are not, can't say they're like boring, so serious, you know. And she's just so wonderful. Abdu'l-Baha seemed to love her so much. I mean, you know, it's just a win-win situation. You just can't escape his diaries. Now, sure, it's like these famous pilgrim notes, you know, you can't 100% say that that's exactly how Abdu'l-Baha said it. But hey, we were in there and what we're hearing makes sense. So we accept it, you know, as truth, as that's exactly what he said or more or less what he said. But because it is published, you can't question it too much. You know, you cannot say, no, he didn't say that. So now we finished with Akka, with her, that she's one of the lucky ones that got to see Abdu'l-Baha both or 3 times. Akka in Europe, but actually just Switzerland and France, Tonon. She got her ticket back because she was broke, and so she missed the opportunity of being with him in London, and she regretted it. It's too bad. But then again, Abdu'l-Baha remembered her, and he went to visit the Baha'is of the US and went to see her, specifically in New York. So 3 continents, 3 places in the space of 3 years. So let me start. I'm in this section now in 1912. This is a year later after Thonon-les-Bains and Vevey, when Abdu'l-Baha now is coming to the US. That's a major 9-month visit to the US. But of course, most of the time Abdu'l-Baha is in America was in New York and Washington. He did go to Canada and to all kinds of other states, California. I spoke at my university in California, and was all over the place. But he spent most of his time in New York and Washington and maybe the East Coast. So I won't go very far because we're going to do the New York the first month, and then maybe a quick visit to Washington, DC, and we'll stop for tonight. And next week we pick up the rest of the, but obviously I don't think she followed him all the way to the West Coast. I think she waited for his return to Washington or to New York. So he sent her this letter. It says, to the attracted maidservant of God, Juliet Thompson. He is God. O thou candle of the love of God. Thy numerous letters were received. According to the promise by the will of God, I shall embark on the boat March 25th, and in the latter part reach Naples, where I shall stay a few days, and from thence start for New York. Verily, this is great glad tidings. Upon thee be Baha'u'llah. Signed, Abdu'l-Baha Abbas, translated in the Orient. Now, I mean, just close your eyes. Imagine you were getting this letter yourself. How would you feel? Writing to you saying, I'm coming. Just announcing his visit to you personally with your name on it. That's what she got. So now we start her diary, and it's, she says 12 o'clock, March 25th, 1912. She says, it is just midnight, she says. Today, the master sails for America. I feel his presence already. Strongly, she says, sorry. Strongly. And gets a letter from her, the person she loved the most, that she had to decide, Abdu'l-Baha said, to either leave him or marry him. You know, that was the dilemma of her life for years and years and years. And so he writes to her from the Church of the Ascension, 5th Avenue and 10th Street on March 23rd. And he says, my dear Juliet, I understand that Abdu'l-Baha is to arrive in New York April 10th. That is in Easter week, so that the 14th of April would be his first Sunday in New York. If his friends in this city would feel any value or assistance in having him speak at the 11 o'clock service in the Church of the Ascension in place of my sermon, I shall be more than happy to invite him to the Ascension pulpit in my place. I should like to know so important and splendid a person, and those who love him whatever hospitality and goodwill can be expressed in this town by such a plan. If, however, his coming in the middle of the week means that he ought to get more quickly into public contact with the city, which may well be the case if his stay is brief, then I would offer the Church of the Ascension to the committee in charge of his affairs to have any kind of service they please, in the daytime or evening between his arrival, let us say April 10th, and the following Sunday. That is to say, I make one of two propositions: to offer him in my pulpit on Sunday, April 14th at 11 a.m., or to offer him the church unhampered by any form of service between the 10th and the 14th. Faithfully signed, Percy S. Grant. Now, I mean, you may think I'm being kind of tedious and reading these things. You have to remember that Abdul Baha is there, about to come. He's always there. He's my point of view. I mean, from any normal presentation at a speech at a conference worldwide, it would probably be silly. Why would you go into these details? I feel I have to do this because it is respect not for the writer, but for Abdul Baha's presence, which is always around this book. So she says that what will obedience bring forth if to see Percy Grant? I wrote thanking him and asking him to get in touch with the committee of arrangements, Mr. Mills and Mr. McNutt. Mr. McNutt is a wonderful man, very favorite of Abdul Baha, loved him so much. And he's the one that was responsible for getting the promulgation of world peace out, published. All the talks of Baha in America. Then she gets another letter from our friend, Percy Grant, on the 28th of March. My dear Juliet, I thank you for your nice letter from Abdul Baha, about Abdul Baha. Whatever may seem most agreeable to those having the matter in charge would be altogether satisfactory to me. Whatever I can do, I hope you will allow me to do to honor such a distinguished visitor from the East, one so loved by my friends. Now, a few days later, now this is Abdul Baha is arriving. He hasn't still arrived in New York. April 8th, 1912. Little did I dream when I began this diary what I would write in its closing pages. This morning I telephoned Percy. This is Juliet. Ah, Juliet. I want to tell you two things, she says. First, Abdul Baha is on the Cedric and will arrive Wednesday morning. And is your time very full Thursday? For I think he will send for you almost at once. Wait, he says, let me get my card, Juliet. No, I have no engagements for Thursday except in the evening and could come anytime during the day to see him. I'm very happy. I shall be very glad to see the master, Juliet. As soon as he arrives, someone will let you know. I then brought up the second thing. I'd like to explain something, I said. Has Dr. Guthrie got in touch with you? No. Then I hardly need to explain. But it was this. Charles James had heard some rumor that the master was to speak in your church. He mentioned this to Dr. Guthrie, who immediately wanted to offer his church too. This morning, a letter came from Dr. Guthrie inviting the master to speak on the night of the 14th. I tell you all this really to say that it was not through me Dr. Guthrie heard of your plans. I'm a very easy person, Juliet, in misunderstandings. I know that. And I'm glad Dr. Guthrie has made the same offer that I have. No one has made the same offer you have. It was then he repeated something he had said to Mr. McNutt. I can't remember just what. That was beautiful of you, I answered. No, no, it was not. And Juliet, I don't want you to feel that this is a favor. I want you to feel, to understand that you have a proprietary interest in the church, a proprietary interest that it is yours to give. The church is yours. The parish house is yours. The rectory is yours. Now, I couldn't understand this, so I read the footnote and then I referred to a message from the Guardian. Now, Juliet was at this time a member of the Church of the Ascension. It was not until much later that the Guardian of the Faith instructed the Baha'is of the United States to sever formal affiliations with churches. So that's it. He wrote a message that if you can look it up on the net, message of the Guardian, I forget the year, in which he told the Baha'is that they could no longer continue being church members. But at this time, apparently all of them had church affiliations and were Baha'is. And that was the end. Sheikh Effendi just said, forget it, you can't do both. We believe in the origins of the church, on the faith, but not the practices. He says, it doesn't work. Just leave the church. So that's why he said what he said. So he had said the parish house is yours, the rectory is yours, all that is yours. We will ask the master to the rectory and formally to me. I don't want to bore you, Juliet. Oh, imagine him boring me. But I want you to feel that it is yours, this house. Here it is, just at the end of the street. Ask anyone to the rectory, anyone you wish. You may eliminate the rector if you would rather not have me here. This and much more, he said. He contradicted that statement once. I want you, he said, with his appealing boyishness, to come around me again, Juliet. His voice broke. He stammered a little and ended. I'm a tongue-tied person when it comes to strong feeling. I should like, I said, to take you by the hand, lead you to the master myself. I want you, Juliet. I want to, Juliet. I don't want to do it any other way. I want you to be there. I don't want to do it without you. Then we will meet on Thursday. We will see each other. In English, it will be beautiful to meet there. It will be the north and the south in his presence, Juliet. God has loved you a long time, Percy, for your work. Some people say they are loved for their enemies. Juliet, if I am loved, it is for my friends. So, I know I spent a lot of time talking about, because this is important in her story, because what will happen later on, we will see how this all ended with him. On April 10th in the morning, in the evening, sorry, this is 11:15 p.m. Tomorrow he comes. Who comes? Who is this that cometh from Bozrah? This is a night of holy expectation. The air is charged with sanctity. I can almost hear the Gloria in excelsis. How close he is tonight. Is it his prayers I feel? Why has earth become suddenly divine? And then at midnight, she says, the master comes today. April 11th, the next day, oh days, oh day of days. I was wakened this morning while it was yet dark by something shining into my eyes. It was a ray from the moon, its waning crescent framed low in my window pane. Symbol of the covenant was my first thought. How perfectly beautiful to be wakened today by it. But at once I remembered another time when I had seen the waning moon hanging then above palm trees. It was on the roof of the house in Akka with the master and Munavar Khanum, his daughter, one of his daughters. The master was pointing to the moon, the east, the moon. No, he said, I am the sun of the west. At dawn, kneeling at my window, I prayed in the swelling light for all this land, now sleeping, that it would wake to receive its Lord, conscious as I prayed for an overshadowing sacred presence, a great, glorious, burning presence, the sun of love rising. This fiery dawn was but a pale symbol of such a rising. Between 7 and 8, I went to the pier with Marjorie Morton and Rhoda Nichols. The morning was crystal clear, sparkling. I had a sense of its being Easter, of lilies almost seen blooming at my feet. All the believers of New York had gathered at the pier to meet the master's ship. Marjorie and I had suggested to them that the master might not want this public demonstration, but their eagerness was too great to be influenced by just two. So we had gone all along with them, only too glad to do so, to tell the truth. During the morning, the harbor misted over. At last, in the mist, saw a phantom ship. And at last, at that moment, some newsboys ran through the crowd, waving extras. "The Pope is dead! Pope is dead!" They shouted. The Pope was not dead. The extras had been printed only on a rumor, but what a symbol and how exactly timed. Closer and closer, ever more substantial, came that historic ship, that epoch-making ship, till at last it swam out solid into the light. One of the Persians sitting in the bow in his long robes, abba, and turban. This was Sayyid Asadullah, a marvelous, witty old man who had come with the master to prepare his meal. He told us later that when the ship was approaching the harbor and the master saw as his first view of America the Wall Street skyscrapers, he had laughed and said, "Those are the minarets of the West." What divine irony. And that you can find that quote in the Star of the West, Volume 3. The ship docked, but the master did not appear. Suddenly, I had a great glimpse in the dim hole behind the deck. Striding to and fro near the door was one with a step that shook you. Just that one stride, charged with power, the sweep of a robe, a majestic head, turban crowned. That was all I saw, but my heart stopped. The master who sent us his love, but wanted us to disperse now. He would meet us all at the Kinney's house at 4. Everyone obeyed, except Marjorie, Rhoda, and myself. Marjorie, who loves the teachings but has never wholly accepted them, said, "I can't leave till I've seen him. I can't. I won't." So though we followed the crowd to the street, we slipped away there and looked around for some place to hide. Quite a distance below the big entrance to the pier, we saw a fairly deep embrasure into which a window was set with the stone wall jutting out from it. Here we flattened ourselves against the window, Rhoda, who is conspicuously tall, clasping a long white box of lilies which she had brought for the master. Just in front of the entrance stood Mr. Mill's car, his chauffeur in it. Suddenly, it rolled forward and, to our utter dismay, parked directly in front of us. Now we were caught, certain to be discovered, but there was no help for it, for Marjorie still refused to budge till she had seen the master. Then he came through the entrance with Mr. McNutt and Mr. Mills, and turned and walked swiftly toward the car. In a panic, we waited. A few nights ago, Marjorie and I had a double dream. These people dream a lot. In her dream, I was out in space with her. In mine, we were in a room together and the master had just entered it. He walked straight to Marjorie, put his 2 hands on her shoulders, and pressed till she sank to her knees. And while she was sinking, she lifted her face to his, and everything in her seemed to be dying except her soul, which looked out through her raised eyes in a sort of agony of recognition. Today, after "Now," she said, "I know." As the master was stepping into the car, he turned and smiled at us. with Marjorie, he was sitting in the center of the dining room near a table strewn with flowers. He wore a light ponch abba. At his knees stood the Kinney children, Sanford and Howard, and his arms were around them. He was very white and shining. No words could describe his ineffable peace. The people stood about in rows and circles, several hundred in the big rooms, which all open into each other. In the dining room, many sat on the floor, Marjorie and I included. We made a dark background for his glory. Only our tears reflected him, and almost everyone there was weeping just at the sight of him. For at last, we saw a divinity incarnate. Divinely, he turned his head from one child to the other, one group to another. I wish I could picture that turn of the head, an oh so tender turn, with that indescribable heavenly grace caught by Leonardo da Vinci in his Christ of the Last Supper, in the study for the head. But in Abdul Baha, irradiated by smiles and the lifting of those eyes filled with glory, which even Leonardo, for all his mystery, could not have painted. The very essence of compassion, the most poignant tenderness, is in that turn of the head. The next morning, early, the master telephoned me, that is Ahmad, Ahmad, telephone for him, and nearly every morning after. Can you imagine the sweetness of that, to be awakened every morning by word from him? Sometimes he just inquired how I was, but often he called me to him. When I first went to see him, he asked me only one question. How is your mother? Not very well, my lord. What is the matter? She's grieving. And I told him why. My brother is soon to be married to a quite beautiful, brilliant girl, who, however, doesn't want to make friends with his family. Bring your mother to me, he said. I will comfort her. He sent for her that very night. I was terribly afraid she wouldn't go. She has been so opposed to my work in the cause, and Ahmed called up in the midst of a thunderstorm. But when I took the message to her that the master wished her to come to him now, she jumped up from her chair and began to scurry around. Just wait till I get my rubbers, she said. We found him exhausted, lying on his bed. He had seen hundreds of people that day, literally, at the big reception and in his own rooms. Mama, who is very shy and demonstrative, rushed to the bedside and fell on her knees. Welcome, welcome, said the master. You're very welcome, Mrs. Thompson. You must be very thankful for your daughter. Praise be to God, she's the daughter of the kingdom. If she were an earthly daughter, of what use would she be to you? At best, she could do you a little material good, but she is a heavenly daughter, a daughter of the kingdom. Therefore, she is the means of drawing your soul nearer to God. Her value to you is not apparent now. When one possesses a thing, its value is not realized, but you will realize later. Mary Magdalene was but a villager. She was even scorned by the people, but now her name moves the whole earth. And in the kingdom of God, she is very near. Your daughter is kind to you. If your son is faithless, she is faithful. She will become dearer and dearer to you. She will take the place of your son, but in the end, your son will be very good. This is only temporary. When upon inquiring for you, I heard of your sorrow. And now I want to comfort you. Trust in God. God is kind. God is faithful. God never forgets you. If others are unkind, what difference does it make when God is kind? When God is on your side, it does not matter what men do to you, but your son will be good in the end. God is kind to you, and I'm going to be kind to you, and I am faithful. Mama, still on her knees, bent and kissed his hand. Tell the master, she said to Ahmed Sohrab, I have always loved him. Lua knows that. And in parentheses, Juliet says, he flew and you, I certainly didn't. I have no need of a witness, the master answered so tenderly, my heart knows. The Mama said to me, all my bitterness has gone, the master must be helping me. Now, now she writes back now, this is like 30 years later, in 1947, this is notes from Juliet. She says, in the years that followed, she would often say to me, I love the master more than you do, Julie, and I obey him better than you do, for he performed a miracle for me, which he never did for you. He took all the bitterness out of my heart. There was another occasion, she says, which I find I haven't mentioned in my diary, when my darling little mother knelt before the master. This was a public occasion after he had spoken in a church. The service over, the whole congregation, including a multitude of believers, surged toward the chancel to shake hands with him. Mama was the only one in that long procession who sank to her knees and kissed his hand. It was on Saturday, April 13th, that Mama and I visited the master. On Friday, he had called me early, asking me to meet him at the McNutt's. I shall never cease to see him as he looked speaking from the stairway, standing below a stained glass window in a ray of sunlight, the powerful head, the figure in these flowing robes outlined in light. The master has a strange quality of beautifying his environment, of throwing a glamour over it and blotting out the ugly. The McNutt's house is ugly. The one redeeming feature of that stairway is its window. All I saw as the master stood there was himself. On wings. In the evening, Friday, he spoke in Miss Phillips's studio. The enormous room was packed. At his dear invitation, I sat at his right, I suppose because I had given Miss Phillips the message. Marjorie at his left, near him, in the simple setting of that studio, its overhead light filling the deep forms of his face with shadow, he looked ruggedly, powerfully beautiful. His words, I will not give, they have been kept. So she doesn't, in this part of the diary, she doesn't quote the talks he gave, because we know that they're all published in the Promulgation of Universal Peace. The very day he arrived, Thursday, the master sent for Percy Grant, but he appointed Friday to see him afternoon. I was not invited to, so in spite of the happy arrangement I knew I would have to stay away. Nor was I told very much about it, only that the master had planned with Dr. Grant to accept his church for Sunday, the 14th, for his first address in New York, choosing the Church of the Ascension out of 13 others, and some of the clergy had even wired to Gibraltar, offering the pulpits for that date. And one other very little thing, Mr. McNutt himself gave me this scrap of news. As he was standing with Dr. Grant at the elevator after leaving the master suite, Dr. Grant said to him, you can't help but love the old gentleman. To me, Percy put it more elegantly. He says, the master compels one's love and esteem, but he radiates his peace and love. So Saturday, April 13th, the master spoke at Marjorie Morton's. Again, you can see that in Promulgation of Universal Peace, the contents of that talk. Again, because of the crowd, he spoke from the stairway, dominating all the beauty of Marjorie's long drawing room with its rich color and carvings and masterly paintings by his superlative beauty. His theme that day was the spiritual season, and in the midst of his talk, a delicious thing happened, which slight though it was, I want to keep. In its very slightness, it may draw the people of the future closer to the master, just as it drew us. These tender little touches of his humor and simplicity bridging for the moment the infinite space between us and his pure perfection, making his divinity accessible. How precious, how heavenly sweet they are, of what unique value. The disciples of Christ, looking beyond that awful chasm of the crucifixion into the mystery of their days with him, were, I suppose, awed into silence about the little things, the adorable little things. So the man of sorrow has been just the man of sorrow to us. We have never formed any conception of the man of love and life into little tenderness, and whose joy overflowed into fun and wit, a happy, smiling, laughing Christ. And yet, I'm sure he was that. But now to tell you of this small thing. With his celestial eloquence, the Master had described the spiritual springtime. Vatabistan, he began and paused for Ahmed to translate. Dead silence. Poor Ahmed had lost the English word. But while he stood helpless, the Master supplied it himself. Summer, he laughed, whereupon a little ripple of delight ran through the audience. His charm had captured them all. He spoke some English, Abdullah. After the meeting, he went up to rest in Mr. Morton's room. He had seen 140 people that morning and was so worn out at the end of his talk that he looked almost ill. His fatigue was apparent to everyone. The people had pity. When I returned from an errand to the kitchen, literally hundreds were streaming toward his room. A dozen were in the room. In the hall were many peering faces and climbing up the stairs, a procession. Oh, can't we shut the door? I asked Dr. Farid, but the Master heard me. Let them come now, he said gently. A mother with the baby stood near the door. The Master took the baby from her and tenderly pressed it to his heart. Beautiful baby, little chicken, he said in his dear English. Then explained that little chicken was the Turkish pet name for child. A young single taxer began to question him. Now, what is a single taxer? Now, the note says a single taxer is a follower of the economic philosophy of Henry George, who advocated a single tax on profits from the sale of land. Single tax on profits from the sale of land. So a single taxer, a young single taxer, began to question him. What message shall I take to my friends, he ended. Tell them, laughed the Master, that wonderful spicy humor in his face, to come into the kingdom of God. There they will find plenty of land and there are no taxes on it. That was his message. So, Sunday, oh Sunday. At the Master's own invitation, I met him at the rectory a half hour before the service. This is the famous day that all waiting to go to Percy Grant's Church of the Ascension. As Miss Barry was holding her Sunday school class downstairs, we were invited upstairs to the back room on the second floor. There, with the Master and the Persians and Edward Getzinger, I guess that's Lord Getzinger's husband, I waited in supreme happiness. Very soon Percy came in. Approaching the Master, he bent his head reverently. In New Testament language, he said, this would be called an upper chamber. It's an allusion to the Last Supper. The Master smiled sweetly and took his hand. After he left, the Master turned to me. This is a dish you have cooked for me, Juliet. He laughed. I hope it is cooked all the way through. Inshallah, smiled the Master. I have more dishes to serve to you when you are rested, I ventured. I hope they are light, he replied, and will rest easily on my digestion. Most of these dishes are so heavy. I inquired for dear Ruha Khanum, his daughter, who was very ill. I have put her in the hands of the Blessed Perfection, said our Lord, and now I don't worry at all. He spoke of my mother very lovingly. Tell her to trust in God, he repeated. Tell her that God is faithful. Read the hidden words to her. The time came to go to the church. The Persians, Edward Getzinger, and I went first, marching in, as Percy had planned it, with the processional, bringing up the rear of the processional. For nearly a year, I hadn't once entered the Church of the Ascension, and now, what a very surprising return. The master waited in the vestry room. I can find no words. It was the conception of an artist, of a true poet. The altar and the whole chancel were banked with calla lilies. On the back of the bishop's chair hung a victor's wreath, an exact reproduction of the Greek victor's wreath, classically simple, a small oval of laurel with its leaves free at the top. Its meaning went to my heart. Dr. Grant read first a prophecy from the Old Testament, pointing to this day, to Baha'u'llah, then the 13th chapter of Corinthians. These were not the lessons for the day, but specially chosen. At the end of the second lesson, just as the choir began to sing in a great triumphant outburst, Jesus lives, Abdul-Baha, with that step of his, which has been described as the walk of either a shepherd or a king, entered the chancel. Suddenly, come to his table. Percy Grant had quietly left his seat and gone into the vestry room, and had returned with the master holding his hand. For a moment, they stood at the altar beneath that fine mural, The Resurrection by John Lafarge. Then, with beautiful deference, Percy led the master to the bishop's chair. This broke the 19th canon of the Episcopal Church, which forced the unbaptized to sit behind the altar rail. As the prayer is over, Dr. Grant made a short introductory address, speaking not from the pulpit, but the chancel steps. Never shall I forget what I saw then. Percy, strong and direct, with his magnificently set head, like the head of some Viking, as Howard McNamara says, giving with a fire even greater than usual, with the strange sparkling magnetism, the Baha'i message to his congregation. Immortal, hallowed by the victor's wreath, visibly inspiring him. For with every flash from those eyes which were fixed on Dr. Grant would appear a fresh charge of energy in him. There was something wonderfully rhythmic in this transmission of fire to the words and the delivery of the man speaking. Was it the sign of some susceptibility in this hitherto unyielding man to the power of Abdul-Baha, or was it just that power transcendent, irresistible quickening whom it chose? May the Lord lift the light of his countenance upon you. What happens when the Lord does? How can I tell of that moment? When the master took the place of Percy Grant on the chancel steps, when standing in his flowing robes there, he turned his face to the people and said, Dr. Grant has just read from the 13th chapter of Corinthians, that the day would come when you will see face to face. You see Universal Promulgation, Universal Peace, page 11 to 13. It was too great to put into words. It was almost too great to bear. The pain of intense rapture pierced my heart. Could the people fail to recognize? Or had they recognized, what would he not have revealed to them? But he could not go no further. He swerved to another subject. I have come hither, he said, to find that material civilization has progressed greatly, but the spiritual civilization has been left behind. The material civilization is likened unto the glass of a lamp chimney. The spiritual civilization is like the light of the chimney. The material civilization should go hand in hand with the spiritual civilization. Material civilization may be likened unto a beautiful body, while spiritual civilization is the spirit that enters the body and gives to it life. With the propelling power of spiritual civilization, the result will be greater. His Holiness Jesus Christ came to this world that the people might have through him the civilization of heaven, a spirit of oneness with God. He came to breathe the spirit into the body of the world. There must be oneness in the world of man. When this takes place, we will have the most great peace. Today, the body politic needs the oneness of the world and universal peace. But to spread the feeling of peace and firmly implanted in the minds of men, a certain propelling power is required. It is self-evident that spiritual civilization cannot be accomplished through material means, for the interests of the various nations differ. It is self-evident that it cannot be accomplished through patriotism, for countries differ in their ideas of patriotism. It is impossible save through spiritual power. Compared with this, all other means are too weak to bring about universal peace. Man has two wings, his material power and development, and his spiritual understanding and achievements. With one wing alone, he cannot fly. Therefore, no matter how far material civilization advances, without the other, great things cannot be accomplished. Humanity, generally speaking, is immersed in a sea of materiality. Dr. Grant asked the Master to give the benediction. Apparently, he gave no blessing, but asked for one for us. Against his high background of lilies, he stood, his face uplifted in prayer, his eyes closed, the palms of his hands uplifted. I seemed to feel streams of light descending, filling those cupped hands. On either side of him knelt the clergyman facing the altar. Percy Grant's head was bowed low. It was a breathless moment. Then the Master raised his resonant voice and chanted. The recessional hymn was Christ our Lord has risen again. How can words tell what I realized or thought I realized at that incomparable service? This church had been my cross for years, from which I have never been able to escape, though twice I had made the attempt, twice wrenching myself away, only to be guided back by what seemed to me in each instance the clear will of God, expressed through a striking miracle, guided back to mortal pain. Was I seeing this morning divine results of this pain? And not only had I suffered more vitally here than in any other place, prayed more passionately, not only had it been the scene of my deepest inner conflict, but the cause of all this had been dramatically enacted here. Here in this pulpit, with all this great force, his disturbing magnetism and the fire of his eloquence. Percy Grant had opposed my unshakable belief, thundering denunciations of the subtle, the Machiavellian Oriental, God forgive me for quoting this, of the slumbering and superstitious Orient, the Orient that brought to the West nothing but disease and death, determined to conquer this faith of mine, which made me resistance to him. He had even gone so far as to openly name the Baha'i sect in this pulpit and to warn his flock against it. And now, framing that matchless head of the Master, who sat there so still in his glory, hung the victor's wreath, or for words vivid and sublime enough to make you see him sitting there in the very spot where he had been so violently denied. The Master took me back into the rectory, into the big dark front room. Percy rushed in for a moment, still in his surplice, his cheeks flushed, his eyes very bright and blue. Juliet, he called, looking from the dining room. Ask if the Master wants anything, tea, coffee, water, anything. Then tell Thomas, the butler. But the Master wanted nothing except to wait to see Dr. Grant, who was being detained in the church, and he filled me with indescribable joy by inviting me to wait with him, sitting beside him. I sat there, happier, it seemed to me, than I had ever been in my life. I was in the presence of my Lord and the one I loved best in all this human world. had at last recognized him. For what else had that exquisite service meant with the resurrection stressed all through it? Such a bold acknowledgement, such a daring action in the very church itself could not have been insincere. It never occurred to me to doubt. But time passed, and Percy did not come back. A great crowd arrived before he did. Someone using the private way for the church, when the church had left the door open, and the people began to surge in. And then, while my heart sank with disappointment, the master made a swift exit. Too late, Mrs. Grant, Percy's dear mother, entered the room. It was a dramatic entrance. She ran in distractedly, glancing from side to side, obviously looking for the master. Not seeing him there, she exclaimed, "If only I could have had his blessing. That figure makes me think of the plains of Judea." At that very instant, Mr. Mills, who had gone out with the master, reappeared. "Abdul Baha," he said, "is asking for Mrs. Grant." I stood at the street door and watched. The master was sitting in Mr. Mills' car, just in front of the house. I saw Mrs. Grant approach it, kneel in the street and bow her head. I saw him place his hands on her head. A year ago, I had a dream. I was in the People's Forum, stooping and kissing Mrs. Grant. She looked up through tears. "I have seen the master," she said in my dream. "He spoke to me. Oh, there was never such a face in the world." Now, on the steps of the rectory, as she returned from the car, she looked up through tears. "I got my blessings, Juliet," she said, "and I didn't have to ask for it." I went back to the church to thank Percy Grant and found him alone. His last parishioner had just gone. For a moment, we stood with clasped hands. "You made everything so beautiful. I can't find the right words to thank you," said Juliet. "My darling," he said, "my darling." Something in his look, something false, woke me. Sick at heart, I turned away. Now, that's what she says in the diary. But what I read to you from the biography, I'm going to read you what happened that she doesn't mention here. I don't know why it is mentioned in this biography. This is what it says. At the end of the master's talk, Percy asked the choir to sing, "Jesus Christ has risen today." I hurried into the vestry and waited impatiently for Percy to appear. When he did, the suspense became unbearable. "Juliet," he said, "I did it all for you." My heart sank. I was almost sure that I could never marry him. He did not come into the faith. So that was the end of that love story. I did it all for you. That night, how I hungered to see the master. My heart burned to see him. I went to the telephone. These days when just by a telephone call we can reach him. One of the Persians answered my call. "Is the master well tonight? Is he resting?" I asked. "He is in his room reading tablets." The next morning, through Ahmed, the master telephoned me. He wanted to know how I was. "Tell him my heart is burning for him, just as it used to in Haifa. The master says, come at once to him." And scarcely was I seated in his room when he began to speak of Percy Grant. He spoke with great love, with great appreciation of the service Percy had rendered, but told me to be very careful in my relations with him. "You must keep your acquaintance, Juliet, absolutely formal." Then he gave me this message. "Convey to Dr. Grant my greetings. Say, I will not forget the services thou hast rendered yesterday. They are engraved on the book of my heart. I will mention thy name everywhere, and know thou this matter of yesterday will become most wonderful in the history of the world. The world of existence will not forget yesterday. Thousands of years hence, thousands, not 1,000, thousands of years hence, the mention of yesterday will be heard, and it will become history that you were the founder of this work. I ask of God for you all those things I have asked for myself, and they are that thou mayest become a sincere servant of God and serve in the kingdom of God, and become sanctified and holy, that thou mayest find a pure and enlightened heart and illumined face, become the cause that the lights of spiritual morals may illumine the hearts in this country, and that they may illumine the world. Become the promoter of truth and deliver the souls from ignorance and prejudice. I supplicate to the kingdom of God for you, and I will never forget the love that was manifested yesterday. I hope, said the master, turning to me, that he will become a believer, but I do not know. The rectorship of the church is in the way. If he could give it up of his own volition, then he might become a believer. He spoke of my dear mother. Convey to thy mother the greetings of Abha. Say to her, always remember my advices. It is my hope that thou mayest forget everything save God. Nothing in this world is sufficient for man. God alone is sufficient for him. God is the protector of man. All the world will not protect the soul. I sent Percy Grant the message, and later he telephoned me. That was a wonderful, wonderful message, he said, his voice strangely upset. Early Sunday evening, the 14th, the master spoke at the Carnegie Lyceum for the Union Meeting of Advanced Thought Centers. Again, you have the talk in pages 14 of Promulgation of Universal Peace. I can give you no idea of his glory that night. He was like a pillar of white fire. I sat in a box with Bolton Hall, one of our fashionable intellectuals, a lean, elegant person with an Emersonian face. Turning to him for a moment, I asked, what do you see? Nothing, dear child, nothing. Now, April 16th, this morning, the master agreed to speak at the Bowery Mission. I want to give them money, he says. He said to me, I'm in love with the poor. How many poor men go to the mission? About 300, my lord. Take this bill to the bank, Juliet, and change it into quarters. And he drew from his pocket a 1,000-franc note. At the time, it was equal to about $250. Have them put the quarters in a bag, keep the money, and meet me at the mission with it. So he handed another 1,000-franc note with the same instructions to Edward Getzinger. So as I left his room, lilies of valley in my hand, a young chambermaid stopped me. Did he give you those? She asked. He gave me some flowers yesterday. Roses, I think. He's a great saint. Later, May Maxwell and I were together in the master's room. So, May Maxwell, as you know, is the mother of Mary Maxwell, who was to become, I guess, Rohia Khanum. So May Maxwell and I were together in the Maxwell master's room. He was lying back on his pillow. May's baby was crawling over him, feeding first the baby, then May and me with chocolates. So this baby was Rohia Khanum. On the pillows beside him was the victor's wreath, which he always kept near him. Suddenly, he brought up Percy's name. I love Dr. Grant, he began. He has rendered me a great service. I love him very much, but I want you to be careful. My lord, I believe my heart is severed. I said, I don't know what I believe. So he looked at me with an arch incredulity. No, really, he said. May laughed. What do you know about it? The master asked. May knows everything about it. Well, has she helped you? How far has her help gone? Has it been sufficient for you? She has helped me, but only God is sufficient when love has gone as deep as that. I know. Now, can you transfer this love to God? To God I can. To you, no. To God. Yes, I can. To God. That will be enough. I shall try to make no more marriages, laughed the master. When you have really given up, he added, he will come after you. I love Dr. Grant, he continued, very, very much, but I want to protect you. May I ask a question, said May. Is Juliet, with the thought of Dr. Grant forever out of her mind, would this be good? But the master answered evasively. If he would become a believer and marry Juliet, it would please me very much. Don't we tire you? I asked a little later. Oughtn't we to leave you now? No, stay. You rest me. You make me laugh, he answered. All right. On April 18th, I asked Mrs. Wright if she would invite Percy to hear the master speak at the Bowery mission. His reply has just come through her. He said, give Juliet my love and my excuses. Tell her I prefer to be remembered by him in the Church of the Ascension. Tell her this and she will understand. Before writing on the master's visit to the Bowery, I must explain how it came about. In February this year, Dr. Halimon asked me for the third time to give the Baha'i message to the mission. I had refused twice before because my dear mother wouldn't allow me to go there. But this third invitation I felt I must accept. So for the first time in my life, I deceived Mama. Sylvia Gannett helped me out. By the way, her marriage has been postponed. She invited me to dine, then went to the mission with me. The only thing Mama knew was that I was dining with Sylvia. The weather that night was terrible, snowing, sleeting, bitterly cold. The mission was packed with homeless men, some of whom had been driven in by the cold and the storm and were there for no other reason. Among these, I learned afterward, was John Good. May he even ever be blessed. Wonderfully named was John Good. He had been released from Sing Sing that very day, an enormous man with a head like a lion and a great shock of white hair. From his boyhood, he had spent his life in one prison or another, and now in his old age had behaved so rebelliously in Sing Sing that they would punish him in the most painful way, hanging him by his thumbs. Full of hate, he had come out of prison, and full of hate and without one grain of belief in anything, he sat among the derelicts in the mission forced in by the storm. And that night, knowing nothing of John Good, I was moved to tell the man how Abdu'l-Baha came out of prison, full of love for the whole world, even his cruelest enemies. After I had finished speaking, Dr. Halimon said, we have heard from Juliet Thompson that Abdu'l-Baha will be here in April. How many of you would like to invite him to speak at the mission? Will those who wish should please stand? The whole 300 rose to their feet. Now, added Dr. Halimon, taking me by surprise, how many would like to study the 13th chapter of Corinthians with Miss Thompson and myself? 30 rose this time, including John Good and a poor alcoholic named Hannigan, a long, lanky, red-haired Irishman. Then we will meet every Wednesday at 8 p.m. and learn something about this love of which Abdu'l-Baha is a great example. And every Wednesday evening after that, John Good and Hannigan came with the 28 others. Of course, in order to help Dr. Halimon on these nights, I had to confess to Mama this first visit to the Bowery, and she was so touched by the story that she gladly consented to my keeping up the work, especially as Dr. Halimon always came for me and brought me home. And now, to return to the immediate present, day before yesterday, April 19th, the Master spoke at the Bowery Mission. I met him at the chapel. Dragging along with me the huge white bag of quarters, Edward also appeared with a bag of the same size, and we sat behind the master on the platform, Mr. McNutt, Mr. Mills, Mr. Grundy, and Mr. Hutchison, and of course, all the Persians were seated there too. The long hall was packed to the doors with those poor derelicts who sleep on park benches or doorsteps. Dr. Halimond called upon me to introduce my lord, which seemed so presumptuous I could scarcely do it. Then the master rose to speak. Here are his heavenly words. Tonight, I'm very happy, for I have come here to meet my friends. I consider you my relatives, my companions, and I'm your comrade. You must be thankful to God that you are poor, for His Holiness Jesus Christ has said, "Blessed are poor, the poor." He never said the rich. He said, too, that the kingdom is for the poor, and that it is easier for a camel to enter the needle's eye than for a rich man to enter God's kingdom. Therefore, you must be thankful to God that although in this world you are indigent, yet the treasures of God are within your reach, and although in the material realm you are poor, yet in the kingdom of God you are precious. His Holiness Jesus himself was poor. He did not belong to the rich. He passed his time in the desert, traveling among the poor, and lived upon the herbs of the field. He had no place to lay his head, no home. He was exposed to the open, to heat, cold, and frost. Yet he chose this rather than riches. If riches were considered a glory, the prophet Moses would have chosen them. Jesus would have been rich. When Jesus appeared, it was the poor who first accepted him, not the rich. Therefore, you are his disciples, you are his comrades, for outwardly he was poor, not rich. Even this earth's happiness does not depend upon wealth. You will find many of the wealthy exposed to dangers and troubled by difficulties. And in their last moments upon the bed of death, there remains the regret that they must be separated from that to which their hearts are so attached. They come into this world naked, and they must go from it naked. All they possess, they must leave behind and pass away solitary, alone. Often, at the time of death, their souls are filled with remorse, and worst of all, their hope in the mercy of God is less than ours. Praise be to God, our hope is in the mercy of God, and there is no doubt that the divine compassion is bestowed upon the poor. His Holiness Jesus Christ said so, His Holiness Baha'u'llah said so. While Baha'u'llah was in Baghdad, still in possession of great wealth, he left it all he had and went alone from the city, living 2 years among the poor. They were his comrades. He ate with them, slept with them, and gloried in being with one of them. He chose for one of his names the title of the poor one, and often in his writings refers to himself as Darvish, which in Persian means poor. And of his title, he was very proud. He admonished all that we must be the servants of the poor, helpers of the poor, remember the sorrows of the poor, associate with them, for thereby we must inherit the kingdom of heaven. God has not said that there are mansions prepared for us if we pass our time associating with the rich. But he has said, there are many mansions prepared for the servants of the poor, for the poor are very dear to God. The mercies and bounties of God are with them. The rich are mostly negligent, inattentive, steeped in worldliness, depending upon their means, whereas the poor are dependent upon God, and their reliance is upon Him, not upon themselves. Therefore, the poor are near the threshold of God and His throne. Jesus was a poor man. One night, when he was out in the fields, the rain began to fall. He had no place to go, no for shelter. So he lifted his eyes toward heaven, saying, "O Father, for the birds of the air thou hast created nests for the sheep a fold for the animals, dens for the fishes, places of refuge. But for me, thou hast provided no shelter. There is no place where I may lay my head. My bed is the cold ground, my lamps at night are the stars, and my food is the grass of the field. Yet, who upon earth is richer than I? For the greatest blessing thou hast not given to the rich and mighty, but unto me thou hast given the poor. To me thou hast granted this blessing. They are mine, therefore I am the richest man on earth. So my comrades, you are following in the footsteps of Jesus Christ. Your lives are similar to his life. Your attitude is like unto his. You resemble him more than the rich resemble him. Therefore, we will thank God that we have been blessed with the real riches. And in conclusion, I ask you to accept Abdul Baha as your servant. After the service, the master and we were walked down the door, while the man in the audience kept their seats at the end of the aisle. The master paused, called to Edward and me, and asked us to stand on each side of him with our bags. He was wearing his spongy abba and was very shining in white and ivory, his face like a lighted lamp. Then down the aisle streamed the sodden and grimy procession, 300 men in single file, the breadline, the failures, broken forms, blurred faces. How can I picture such a scene? That forlorn host out of the depths out of the mud and scum of things, where nevertheless something always sings. And the eternal Christ, reflected in the mirror of the servant, receiving them all like prodigal sons, stray sheep? No, like his own beloved children, who resembled him more than the rich resembled him. Into each palm, as the master clasped it, he pressed his little gift of silver, just a symbol and the price of a bed. Not a man was shelterless that night, and many I could see found a shelter in his heart. I could see it in the faces raised to his, and his face bent to theirs. Those interchanged looks, what a bounty to have witnessed them, to have such a picture stamped on my mind forever. As the man filed toward him, the master held out his hand to the first, grasped the man's hand, and left something in it, perhaps 5 or 6 quarters for John. John Good told me afterwards that the completely destitute ones received the most. The man glanced up surprised. His eyes met the master's look, which seemed to be plunging deep into his heart with fathomless understanding. He, this poor derelict, must have known very little of even human love or understanding. And now, too, suddenly, he stood face to face with divine love. He looked startled, incredulous, as though he couldn't believe what he saw. Then his eyes strained toward the master, something new burning in them, and the master's eyes answered with a great flash, revealing a more mysterious, a profound love. A drowning man rescued or taken up into heaven? I saw this repeated scores of times. Some of the men shuffled past, accepting their gift and graciously, but most of them responded just as the first day. Who can tell the effect of those immortal glances on the lives, and even perhaps at the death of each of these men? Who knows what the master gave that night? And there's, I'm going to just probably finish tonight with this, just a parenthesis here. It's a footnote. It says, months later, John Good told me about Hannigan, because they were talking about these 2 gentlemen that were present at the mission. This Hannigan was a generous man. If he had a dime and somebody needed a nickel, he would split his dime. But there was no doubt about it. He was also a Bowery, though tough and pretty nearly always drunk. He had been counting the days to the 19th of April, but unluckily lost count. And when the 19th came and with it the master's visit to the Bowery, he was in one of his stupors. Waking up from it, he really sorrowed. Still, there was another chance. The master was to speak in Flatbush the following Sunday, and somehow Hannigan heard of this. Flatbush is a long way off, and that Sunday he hadn't even a nickel. So he walked. At midnight, John Good went to his room and found him in the usual state. Why did you do it this time, Hannigan? And you straight from seeing the master? Asked John. That's just it, he said Hannigan earnestly. I'm straight from seeing him. Why, John, he's perfection, the light of the world. He is, John. It's too much for a man. It's too discouraging. John never told me this till after the death of Hannigan, or I would have taken him to the master. But after all, he, this Bowery tough, had seen the reality. All right, ladies and gentlemen, don't want to tire you.
Lovely story.
We will just have to stop it here. We are not where I wanted to be, but sometimes you can push it. It's going to continue because we're not finished yet with New York. It's still, there's so many things happening in New York, and then we're going to go to Washington for. But there's no point. This is enough. This just if you just get a feeling for who Abdul Baha was, and how he behaved, how he was, and we're supposed to be, we're supposed to follow him. That's the whole point. Baha'u'llah says, "I give you my son as an as interpreter and as your example." So, whenever we are in doubt as to how one should behave, we have not only his writings, but we have his life and the witnesses, people that were with him. And through stories like this, we pick up something. Each one picks up what he can.